Afternoon to those Zooming on Eastern and Central Time, and good morning to those joining us west of the Rockies. My name is Brent Fewell, and I'm with ConservAmerica. And I'm delighted today to be moderating a webinar on the Pebble mine, a proposed Alaskan mine, which it's fair to say has generated considerable interest. ConservAmerica is pleased to be co-hosting today's webinar along with our partner EarthX as part of a webinar series on hot and trending issues involving the environment, energy, and conservation. But before we jump into the program, I wanted to say a quick word about ConservAmerica for those who may not be familiar with us. Our organization has been around for nearly 3 decades. And in the last year, we have made a renewed effort to convene programs like this and help lead on important policy issues affecting the environment. We are a right-of-center group that seeks to promote pragmatic solutions to our nation's energy, environmental, and conservation challenges, advocating for market-based solutions and meaningful and lasting regulatory reform. I'm pleased to introduce today's panelists. We have 3 terrific panelists lined up for today's discussion, and I have had the distinct pleasure of working with all of them over the years, and I consider each a friend and prominent voice and leader in the world of environmental and conservation policy. Chris Wood is the president and CEO of Trout Unlimited and previously served as the Senior Policy and Communications Advisor to the Chief of the U.S. Forest Service. Tom Sadler is the Deputy Director of the Marine Fish Conservation Network, a coalition of commercial and recreational fishing associations, conservation groups, and marine science organizations. And McKie Campbell is a former Deputy Chief of Staff for the Governor of Alaska and Commissioner of the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. We are grateful, gentlemen, for your perspectives today. Each of you have agreed to offer opening thoughts on Pebble Mine. Chris has agreed to kick off today's call. And Chris, tell us a little bit about Trout Unlimited and why all the fuss over this mine.
Thanks, Brent, and thanks ConservAmerica for inviting us to share our perspectives today. So Trout Unlimited is we're a membership organization of people who love to fish. We've got 375,000 members and supporters spread all over the country. And we've been working on this proposed Pebble mine for about 15 years now. Let me just try to set the stage a little bit to describe this landscape that we're talking about in Southwest Alaska. This is a place that's about the size of West Virginia, and yet there are only a few thousand people who live there. There are 7 rivers that drain into Bristol Bay. In 2 of them, you have a place called the Nushagak, which is every year among the top Chinook or king salmon producers in the world. And the Kvichak every year produces about nearly half of all of the world's wild sockeye salmon come from that Bristol Bay system, the Kvichak being a primary contributor. You also have, the Kvichak is also notable, as are other rivers in the Bristol Bay region, for being one of the few places on Earth where you can catch native rainbow trout that will exceed 30 inches. And it's precisely in the headwaters of those 2 rivers, the Kvichak and the Nushagak, that a Canadian mining company has proposed to build a massive copper, silver, gold, and molybdenum mine. This is a very remote landscape. It is completely undeveloped. I fish up there every year. And in order to build this mine, you would literally have to industrialize that landscape. To give you a sense of the scale of the fishery, on average, about 40 million sockeye make their way down into Bristol Bay every year. The fishery supports about 14,000 jobs every year. It's a $1.5 billion annual economic impact, just on the virtue of that fishery, because the state has done such a good job of managing it over the years. And you contrast that with the Columbia and Snake River basins, where right now as a nation, we have spent over $16 billion to try to recover Snake River salmon. It is one of the least successful restoration efforts in the history of mankind. All we have to do to keep this fish factory that is Bristol Bay intact is to have the wisdom to leave that place alone. The Pebble mine is precisely the wrong mine in the wrong place for Bristol Bay.
So McKie, you obviously hail from Alaska, spent a lot of time there, both personally and also in your former official capacity as a state regulator. What's your perspective on Pebble Mine?
Well, I'm glad that Chris closed with the phrase "wrong mine, wrong place." We've all heard that, but I want to talk just a little bit about why. And as he said, this is an amazing salmon resource, and I won't reiterate, but I will mention. Chris really emphasized the sport fishery. That's extraordinarily important. There's also the commercial fishery. There's also subsistence fishery, which is literally irreplaceable for the residents of Bristol Bay. All those are extraordinarily important. This is an area that is also extraordinarily sensitive in terms of environmentally sensitive. It is not an area where if something goes wrong, there is not any chance of cleaning it up. It's an area where streams literally disappear into the ground, reappear onto the surface. There's no firm boundary between the surface water and the groundwater. I was first out in Pebble and Bristol Bay in 1992 when I was the deputy commissioner, then of the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. At the time, I thought that it would be very, very difficult for anybody to design a mine that would be permitted, but I also believed in the NEPA process, and I thought they deserved the right to try to come up with a proposal and put it together and run it through the NEPA process. Since that time, there have been 4 or 5 major international mining companies, Caminco, Rio Tinto, Anglo American, Mitsubishi, who've invested huge amounts of money and then walked away, ultimately said, because we can't design a thing to do this safely. Anglo walked over from over a $500 million investment. But now we have a junior Canadian mining company who has no profit from mining, whose only income is from investment, trying to develop this. And they're trying to develop it in a way that ultimately, as much as I believe in the NEPA process, is through a deeply flawed NEPA process. And I hope that we can kind of talk about that some more as we go.
Thank you, McKie. Tom, you're an avid trout, salmon fisherman. What are your concerns and what's your perspective on Pebble Mine?
So, yeah, I'm going to wear 2 hats here. The network, this isn't something we normally work on, but it's clearly something that we care deeply about, and we've actually signed on a letter with 25 other groups, asking that they not issue a permit for this. It's if the network, it's our interest is in the whole waterfront, and so what I wanted to quickly hit on was the seafood production importance of Bristol Bay. What we're seeing is a growing interest in direct-to-consumer food supply that started before the pandemic, and it's been increasing. And there's groups like the Local Catch Network that are providing healthful, low-impact, economically sustainable seafood through local and direct marketing arrangements. You've got the Slow Food campaign that's been working in the field to sustainable fish for years, educating seafood folks and developing projects to support responsible artisanal fishing communities like Bristol Bay. Most of what I cook comes from a community-based supported fishery, Sitka Salmon Shares. These community-based organizations allow people to buy a share of the harvest from those small boat commercial fishermen, the independent guys operating out of Bristol Bay. What was interesting to me recently, the administration issued an executive order promoting American seafood competitiveness and economic growth. And in that executive order, it says America needs a vibrant and competitive seafood industry to create and sustain American jobs, put safe and healthy food on American tables, and contribute to the healthy American economy. At the same time, that executive order warns of a trade imbalance in seafood, saying, despite America's bountiful aquatic resources, by weight, our nation imports over 85% of the seafood consumed in the United States. So if we want a supply of high quality domestic seafood to bring to America's table, then we need to be doing everything in our power to protect those resources rather than risking them for mineral extraction by a foreign company. I'm not going to go back over some of the points that my colleagues have already made. The great thing about getting to hit cleanup is I can point and say, you know, what those guys said. I just want to really quickly switch and put on my fishing guide hat and talk really quickly about the importance of the economic importance of outdoor recreation. Pebble Mine sits at the heart of a world-class trout and salmon streams. Brian Kraft, owner of Alaska Sportsman's Lodge, said, Alaskans in Bristol Bay businesses have said no to this mine for years. I'm wearing a shirt that's probably 10 years old from Sportsman's for Bristol Bay. Pebble Mine would fundamentally alter a world-class fishery upon which family businesses and 33,000 recreational fishermen rely, and rivers that are slated to bring 40 million wild salmon to the region this year. Sport fish tourism brings in $75 million a year to the local economy and draws fishermen from around the world. And according to the American Fly Fishing Trade Association, which I happen to have been on the board for a number of years, sport fishermen spend nearly $60 million a year to experience fishing in that area. So every fly shop, tackle manufacturer in the world earns a small amount of money, or in some cases, a large amount of money from fishing in that area. And we've been having our discussion for 10 years, and the proposals haven't gotten any better, or the opposition hasn't getting any less. So, you know, where do we go from here? I think we need to not have that permit. Go ahead.
Let me press you and the others, and challenge the three of you. The response might be, mining is critical to the U.S. economy, provides lots of jobs. Copper is in large demand for manufacturing, not only in the U.S., but around the globe. So why is this different? I heard wrong mine, wrong place, but is this kind of a anti-mining sentiment that the three of you are presenting?
Can I take first crack at that? And I'd like to, because I'm generally a pro-mine type guy. I believe with proper engineering and proper investment that most mines can be done with acceptable environmental impacts. But the problem is, if you have mines that doesn't work for, mines that go bad, they're wrong in geologic time. I don't mean this isn't something where you go out and spend a couple of weeks or a couple of months or decades cleaning up. It's wrong in geologic time. In this case, I mentioned I was first out there in '92. For over 25 years, I kind of said, you know, let's wait and see what somebody can come up with. But when Pebble came out with its proposed mining plan in September of 2018, I wrote Tom Collier a long email, which led to an exchange of a number of long emails back and forth with him. But basically I said, Tom, I've been holding fire for 25 years. This mine plan is dangerous. I can't support this. You can't be for good development without sometimes being opposed to bad development.
Yeah, I'll take a whack at that too, Brent. So Trout Unlimited, part of our mission is protecting and restoring rivers and streams that, you know, trout and salmon depend on. And as you well know, Brent, because we met working on this issue, cleaning up abandoned mines is very, very important to us. And we have a ton of employees who are, you know, engaged in the mining industry. I went on a tour of one of the big mines that Freeport-McMoRan operate, one of the big moly mines in Colorado. And the guy who drove me around that mine had a TU hat on. He was actually a TU member. And we've worked with companies like Freeport McMoran and Kinross to clean up abandoned mines all around the country. But this is a mine that mining companies will tell you they don't want to see built. This is not an anti-mine proposition. This is just the wrong place to build this mine. There are definitely places that are appropriate to mine copper. It's a strategic mineral. We need it. Bristol Bay is not that place.
Yeah, and you know what I'll chip in here is that if this resource is destroyed, then all those people that depend on it for fishing, those small boat commercial fishermen, those small businesses have no alternatives. They can't pick up and go, hey, we're going to go move to wherever. So it's not a anti-mining as much as it's, hey, we have to protect these jobs, this resource that's providing these benefits to the American people.
Fair points, gentlemen. As you all are aware, and folks, our listeners may not be, EPA a few years back actually did a preemptive veto on the mine and found that the impacts to wetlands and streams to be unacceptable. There's a lot of politics, obviously, behind this mine. Administration's watching it very closely. The Hill's watching it very closely. I mean, what has changed, if anything? The veto was obviously rescinded by EPA. Just some thoughts on the process itself.
So I'll start with this one, Brent, since TU actually litigated the lifting of that so-called proposed determination, the 404C proposed determination. That's in court now. We're hoping that a judge will reinstate it because we think due process wasn't applied when it was lifted. And look, I will tell you that it was a hard thing to make the decision to advocate for preemptorily denying a mining permit, but we had been waiting for a permit from this company for a decade. And we're talking about, $1.5 billion industry. These are small business owners. They have a need to make investments in their fleet, in equipment, in refrigeration equipment. And as long as the specter of this thing was hanging over their heads, they couldn't do that. And it's not an insignificant industry. And so, we did make the decision to advocate for that preemptory denial. I know it's not something that, I think is appropriate often, but in a landscape like this, I think it was appropriate. And we're also not a litigious organization, but we are litigating on the lifting of that proposed the proposed determination. And if the court's reinstated, it will stop the mine at least temporarily.
Yeah. And I'll offer a slightly different perspective on that. I didn't disagree necessarily with the science that was used in coming to that determination. I did have grave concerns about the use of a preemptive determination simply as a matter of due process. But to your question, what's changed since then is the September 18th mine plan that Pebble came up with. And one of the consistent things in this, one of the few consistent things is Pebble keeps changing that mine plan over and over. It has evolved, but it's been going through the NEPA process. And in the NEPA process, the various cooperating agencies, both state and federal, and the public subject matter experts have been scathing in their comments on the NEPA process and what's being proposed. I could frankly use up the rest of our hour just reading excerpts from some of their comments, but I'll just say the Department of Interior talked about, based on these identified deficiencies, the DEIS is so inadequate that it precludes meaningful analysis. That was not the harshest of the bunch, but so what's changed is we do have the full-scale NEPA process going on. We're expecting the issuance of a final environmental impact statement sometime within the month, and probably a month after that, a record of decision.
Thanks, McKie. And I just remind the participants, the audience today, if you have questions, feel free to submit them electronically. So just I've heard a lot about process, wrong mine, wrong place. let the process, take take the proper course. Let the agencies make their decisions, informed decisions through the NEPA process. This is public knowledge that the mine proponents have spent more than 11 million on lobbying in Washington, D.C. So there's obviously, I've never seen any case like this, any mine like this before. I mean, is it unprecedented in your perspective? Is that unusual from your perspective? Thoughts on the level of lobbying for this project?
I lobby in DC, and though I've been working on this issue pro bono because I wanted to make sure I could say whatever the heck I felt about it. I did turn down multiple offers from Pebble to come to work for them, and I turned down an offer from mine opponents to come to work for them. But the ratio of lobbying to science is wholly out of whack on this project. There's yearning need for more science and better studies, and I think that'd be clear. And I think we're substituting lobbying for that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a lobbyist, been doing this for 40 years. I guess the question is based on what I think, the number of people who've been opposed to this, the long-going opposition to this, obviously generates interest in trying to get it done, but it seems to me, boy, they're spending an awful lot of money to get something that nobody seems to really want other than a Canadian mining company right now. And as you pointed out at the beginning, there are mining companies that have bailed on this one. So I don't know. I mean, I would never dismiss my colleagues in the advocacy field, but boy, this one looks like a tough one for me.
Yeah, Brent.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, and I should correct myself. I was not imputing the character of lobbyist, as I happen to be one, and I think we all are. So that wasn't a slight against lobbyists. But go ahead, Chris.
I'll tell you the thing that I think is unprecedented is that the Pebble Partnership has probably spent a similar amount of money in those Alaska Native villages where this mine would benefit, and the people of King Salmon, the people of Igiagig, they hate this mine. Most conservation in Alaska has often been forced on it by the federal government through the passage of legislation. But in this case, what is truly, I think, unprecedented is the opposition that's coming from those local communities itself. That's where the opposition, frankly, is strongest.
Right. And McKie, Chris raises some good points. I mean, obviously the state interest in this is particularly compelling. The proposed mine is on state lands, correct? But there are also private lands that are needed for accessing. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Especially with the recent change of the LEDPA, the least environmentally damaging alternative, to the northern route, the transportation route, both a road and a pipeline, which would pump the mine ore back to the Cook Inlet, needs to cross private land. And Bristol Bay Native Corporation, which owns the huge amount of the subsurface in that area and a good amount of surface, and other surface owners have said, we don't want you crossing us. Bristol Bay Native Corporation recently wrote a very strong letter to the Corps saying unequivocally, we want to be clear, they do not have permission and we will not give permission to cross our land. The Corps responded and said, we don't take land ownership into account. We just give a dredge and fill permit, and it's up to the applicant to work this out. I personally don't understand how they could do that without trying to trigger, trying to figure out some way through the state to use eminent domain, which I think would create a total firestorm. Mm-hmm. But that's going to be a major problem. Just continuing on what Chris was talking about how much opposition there is in the area. population of Bristol Bay is overwhelmingly opposed to the mine. Right now in America, we're dealing with huge issues of social license, social justice, environmental justice. I can't think of any issue in Alaska where these issues have been as prominent as right now with the Pebble mine in Bristol Bay. All the residents of Bristol Bay see this as the single greatest social justice issue of their lives.
We've got a couple of questions from the audience, and Connor writes in, would you all be able to discuss how the presidential election this fall could influence the future of the project, given that it sounds like we may have a final EIS and record of decision before then? Any thoughts on that?
I can
Go ahead, McKie.
Well, a couple things. First off, as much as it has been, I think, a flawed process through the Corps of Engineers, I'm not writing off the possibility of the White House and the Trump administration being involved and stepping in a favorable way. I've had the privilege of twice going to the White House with Andy Sabin to talk to people there in the White House who are very receptive, were very interested in the whole questions and stuff. And I know there are other people who are also continuing their efforts working with the White House. So I'm not sure I'm not giving up hope on something happening there. But even if the ROD is, and Brent, you can expand on the legality of this, but even if the ROD grants the mine's permits, the EPA will retain, my understanding, the EPA will retain the right to reverse that in a new administration.
Yes, that's correct, McKie. Any thoughts to our last question there, Chris?
Yeah, I'll just piggyback a little bit off what McKie said. We just sent in a letter to the president with 250 outdoor industry and business leaders with our partners at AFTA and elsewhere, the American Fly Fishing Tackle Association, who have been, whose member organizations have been terrific on this for a very, very long time. With that was a companion letter of about 30,000 individual sportsmen and women who wrote in opposition to this mine. There's absolutely, I mean, the local people don't want the mine. The hunting and angling community doesn't want the mine. The recreational fishing community doesn't want the mine. The commercial fishing industry doesn't want the mine. Polls across the state of Alaska demonstrate that the state doesn't want the mine. I'm not going to give up on the president here. I don't know that he couldn't intervene at the 11th hour simply because nobody wants this mine. It's right. Nobody wants it.
Yeah. McKie, obviously mining is an important industry to Alaska. Do you get the sense that the elected officials in Alaska are concerned about setting a precedent by opposing this mine, that it could also have spin-off effects on future mines?
They do. I think they're concerned in two different ways. One is there are a lot of people who do not like the mine, don't want it to happen, but as you said, are very leery of acting in certain manners that are set precedent that would adversely set development. I mean, this is a matter of distinguishing good development, which Alaska depends on, versus bad development. Having said that, there also, most all the development interests in Alaska are very aware that Pebble has given development and a lot of issues in Alaska just a bad name overall. There was something called this ballot initiative number 1, the Save Salmon, Protect the Salmon initiative. There was a direct result of an effort to kill Pebble and stop Pebble, but it inadvertently would have probably had a devastating effect upon the oil and gas industry, upon a lot of other mines, and a lot of just general development throughout the state. I think there's concern that as long as Pebble's around, it will continue to have those adverse aspects.
Yeah, fair point. So we have another question from Bo, who's calling in today, who's listening. Who is the main agency or group leading the charge on this, and what can average sportsmen do to have an impact on this issue? Who is the main interest leading the charge in defeating this mine? Chris, would that be you?
Brent, let me tell you about this organization called Trout Unlimited. You can just go to www.tu.org and become a member, because TU has been the lead in this issue for about 15 years. But what is remarkable about this is that we are not alone. We started off alone. Nobody had ever heard of, outside of McKie and a few other sort of, the intelligentsia, very few people knew about Bristol Bay.
First time I've been called that, Chris.
But very few people had heard of Bristol Bay unless you were lucky enough to get to fish there. And but now, I mean, there are thousands of businesses that are in opposition. The conservation community is unanimous, and it switches from groups on like NRDC who have been engaged in this for a long time, all the way over to much more conservative hunting and angling groups are in opposition to this mine. So I will take some pride in the fact that TU was there at the start. We've been there from the start. The other thing that's really remarkable about this is, as an angler, you can't get the commercial fishing industry and recreational anglers to agree on what to have for lunch, much less to work for over a decade on a project like this. But we have been in lockstep with that industry in Alaska. And frankly, I think that's been very helpful to forming what should be a very durable alliance, because we have a lot more in common that we share than otherwise. But really, it's the whole panoply of conservation interests have been supporting this. But TU's been the lead for a very, very long time.
Yeah, that was a softball to you, Chris. So
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank
thanks
you,
for
Bo.
Well,
TU's
can I
leadership
take
on
a
this.
swing as well?
Okay, go ahead, Tom.
No, but to answer Bo's question, I mean, I think you can write to the Army Corps of Engineers, you can write to EPA. There's all sorts of take action opportunities out there, but it's really talk to your elected officials, your federal elected, your congressmen, your 2 senators, and let them know your concerns, because I probably don't share the optimism in terms of the administration that some of my colleagues may
That
say.
was hope, not hope. Not
No, okay. So the hope, I probably don't share the hope, and but if I were the mining executives and knowing what you just said, Brent, about having EPA being able to overturn this at some point, I'd be having a lot of really concerning conversations in the boardroom about investing in this, given the long-term opposition. So, but that's, if the administration doesn't stop this, there are continued to be opportunities for Congress to step in and use their authority, use the power of the purse, notwithstanding any other provision of law, amendments in the Appropriations Committee to slow this down, put the kibosh on it, and we saw that already. So tell your elected officials yes, and join TU and support and support organizations that support stopping this this mine.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just read something to you real quickly while we're talking about elected officials. The Alaska delegation has been very concerned about this. They don't want to screw up the process. As you said, I think there's a genuine concern about not causing inadvertent damage. But last year in the appropriation process, Senator Murkowski, who is the chairman of the Interior Approach Subcommittee, added language to the approach bill. And I'm going to read just the middle part of the language here. It says, the committee notes that multiple federal agencies commented to express their concerns that DEIS is inadequate and does not meet the Army Corps' obligations to thoroughly evaluate the potential impacts of the proposed project. The committee shares these agency concerns that the DEIS lacks certain critical information about the proposed project and related mitigation, and therefore likely underestimates its potential risks and impacts. Sound science must guide federal decision-making, and all gaps and deficiencies identified in comments from federal agencies and other stakeholders, including Alaska Natives, must be fully addressed, even if that requires additional scientific study. Now, since that time, that was about the DEIS, the draft environmental statement. A preliminary final environmental impact statement has come out. And the Corps shared that with all the cooperating agencies, including the tribes of Bristol Bay. And without any injunction in them not to share it, and the tribes have shared that, which Pebble quickly characterized as leaking the document. But the PFEIS makes it very clear that so far, not only has the Corps not corrected many of the deficiencies in the DEIS, they've added new deficiencies to the whole proposed plan.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that a little bit. So in this latest round of this National Environmental Policy Act process, which can be confounding for many people because of all the acronyms and the bureaucracy involved, what's remarkable is that even after getting another shot at the piñata, the EPA came out and expressed dismay about potential underestimation of water quality standards. The state of Alaska came out and the Alaska Department of Natural Resources and expressed their concern that they hadn't fully analyzed the potential effects of a dam failure, because what we're talking about here is a massive mine, and they're going to have to hold behind a giant earthen dam all these toxic tailings in this area where the groundwater and the surface water, there's no disconnect between them. I mean, it's the same thing. You fly over this, it's like a giant sponge flying over this region. And then you've got the Fish and Wildlife Service, which expressed their concerns that they had underestimated the potential loss of streams and wetlands by an order of magnitude. So even the agencies that are engaged in this process are expressing their deep concern that this thing is inadequate.
Yeah.
But admittedly, I can't remember a project in recent years that's had so much opposition and so little support among other stakeholders, broad stakeholders. And when I suppose when you're kind of down and out, what can you do? We've talked a little bit about how the mine needs to obviously connect with local property owners, and I understand this week that Pebble has proposed a Pebble performance dividend to residents of Bristol Bay. So when all else fails, sweeten the pot for the local people.
Yeah,
So-
it's Tom, let me just shoot one here real
Sure,
quick.
yeah.
This is just you know what this is? It's cynicism. It's cynicism, pure and simple. That's all it is. This company doesn't. I'm not going to say something crass in case my mom is listening, but they don't have any profit to give out a dividend for crying in the night. It's as cynical as this. What they've done is they've sought a permit for a $2 billion. A small mine, right? A 2 billion ton mine. And yet when they go and talk to investors, they talk about the potential for a 10.7 billion ton mine, because that's the only way you can make this thing profitable, is by developing the entire landscape. And if you develop that entire landscape as they're telling their investors they want to do, you can write that fishery off. The same fishery that produces half of all of the world's wild sockeye salmon.
Yeah. I agree with Chris. They're basically trying to buy this social license, but you got to have profits to even make that cynical attempt. I also want to come back for a moment to the dam issue that Chris mentioned. In the PFEIS, they found various dam problems in the review, and they altered the decision. And the way Tom Collier describes the dam is, the problem is if you take a glass full, half full of sand and half full of water, mix it up and pour it on the table, it causes a big mess. But if you take a half glass of just dry sand and pour it on the table, it doesn't go anywhere. You don't need a dam to hold it in. And he says that's the way their dam is designed to function. It's supposed to be a flow-through dam where the water will flow through the dam to a subsequent dam that catches just the water for water treatment. But the problem, and that's a fine plan, but the problem is AECOM, the Corps of Engineers third-party contractor who's doing the NEPA process, had a separate group of AECOM dam experts who are not part of the NEPA process, but come in and review this. And they said there's no guarantee at all this dam will work the way it's intended, that it depends on the idea that as the bulk tailings are put into that, come out through this huge pipe, that they will separate, and somehow the coarse dam tailings will go on the face of the dam and allow the increased porosity so for the water to continue to flow through, and all the fines will settle to the bottom. But there's no way to guarantee that's going to happen. If the fines coat the interior surface of the dam, you could build up hydrostatic pressure and have a major dam failure, catastrophic dam failure. However, Pebble and the Corps of Engineers have absolutely refused to consider a catastrophic dam failure as an alternative. And their biggest spill scenario that they've analyzed is a 6-hour break in a pipeline, which would equal 0.0004% of the tailings dam that could potentially come out.
Interesting. Fascinating statistics there, Kai. Got another question from Sam, who is calling in from the UK. And Sam asked, are there examples of similar projects in the US that have been halted or squashed? If so, what would be similarities to Pebble? Are you guys familiar with any? I have a hard time thinking of one.
I can't think of any, but I would think that if smart investors saw that much opposition to something, they probably wouldn't push forward with it. And you know, I want to go back to a point that McKie is making. The social license that he's talking about is just not here for this mine. The other thing is that we're running such a risk that to destroy another industry for something that nobody other than the miners, the mining company want, just, it doesn't make sense to me. And it clearly, as McKie points out with the mentioned social license, no one else.
You know, Robert writes in too. It's an interesting aspect, and Chris, you pointed this out, that it's a Canadian mining company. Robert asked, how is it that a foreign company is allowed to apply and go through a process to mine on American soil, and why has no U.S. mining company had an interest in the project?
You know, I don't work for a mining company, but my sense is that U.S. mining companies are in it for the long haul, that their reputations matter, and they really do try. I've got to learn a lot about the mining industry since we began cleaning up abandoned mines 15 years ago. And, you know, frankly, they're the first partner to pony up and help, because they want the social license that we're all talking about to be able to operate on U.S. soil. And frankly, again, I'm not a mining company and I have a perspective on this, but I think the reason that we don't have U.S. mining companies lining up to operate in Bristol Bay is because they know it can't be done.
Yeah.
You know, they know it can't be done.
I'll mention the big companies that have been in, like Anglo, like Mitsubishi and stuff, and I have respect for them. But you know, they invested huge amounts of money and they pulled out because they felt it couldn't be done safely.
So what's the next steps? I mean, what's the next steps, McKie, for Pebble? Obviously, the process, it's taking its course. At what point will the process conclude and the Corps and EPA decide whether to grant license for this?
I think we expect the FEIS, the final environmental impact statement, to be out sometime as early as this week, as late as maybe a month, but soon. And then probably about a month or so after that, the record of decision, which would either grant or not grant the thing. Now, after that, and this is another way this project has been different. Normally, when you get to an EIS or a company seeking mines, they try to seek all the permits at once, the federal permits and the state permits. In this case, the Pebble and the Corps of Engineers have sequenced the issue where the only thing that they're working on right now is the dredge and fill permit. And I think they're basically wrong on black letter of law on this stuff, but they've deferred all the state permits. And I think one of the reasons is they don't have the funds right now to adequately keep doing all the studies that are needed. And so what they're very hopeful of is they'll get a favorable record of decision and find some big angel investor that will come and invest in them, and then they'll have the money to continue the process. But by doing this, it veils from the public a full analysis of all the impacts.
So it's not too late for the public to weigh in on this?
It's not too late. It's a critical time right now.
Yep.
Great. Chris, before we sign off, you know, I want to let folks know a little bit more about TU's efforts on the cleaning up abandoned hard rock mine. You guys have just a tremendous record of trying to promote voluntary cleanups, work with mining interest. What is the status of Good Samaritan?
It's a timely question. So we've been engaged in a conversation with, I don't think this is inappropriate for me to say this, but the National Mining Association and the portion of the environmental community that cares about this issue. For the folks who don't, who aren't, intelligentsia relative to cleaning up abandoned mines. As Brent knows, because we met when he was at the EPA, the Clean Water Act, which is one of our, most important environmental laws, unfortunately provides a profound disincentive for organizations like mine to get involved in cleaning up abandoned mines that we had nothing to do with. These are mines that could be 100 years old. There's no corporate owner. There's no one to go after for the cleanup. But your former agency, Brent, estimates that 40% of all of our western headwater streams are deleteriously affected by these abandoned mines. And that also happens to be exactly where all the native fish are holed up these days. So we've had an abiding interest in creating a little more flexibility for organizations like ours or mining companies that don't have anything to do with the historic mine waste to go out there and clean up water. And maybe if you can't, you can spend, X to get it to 90% of clean water standards, but it would be 10X to get to 100, to at least allow that good work to continue without being on the hook to have to get to 10X, or else you're liable for that, for that bill. And there is a bill that is likely to be introduced in Congress very soon. I think the good work of the NMA and the environmental community, with TU sort of playing in the middle, has been very productive. And we've got just a couple of really small issues left to resolve. But, and I have been looking for this pony in a pile for a long time. But I feel very confident that we're very close to getting Good Samaritan legislation through Congress that would allow for organizations like mine, local communities, mining companies that don't have anything to do with the historic waste to clean up abandoned mines. This is the analog to the issue we're talking about now. On this side over here, we have Bristol Bay. We have the Pebble mine, a mine that no one wants to build other than this Canadian mining company. And over here, we have this issue of cleaning up abandoned mines that everyone agrees need to be cleaned up. So hopefully we can stop that and do this.
Yeah, well, Chris, I want to just commend you. I think the partnership that you've had with NMA on Good Samaritan and other mining companies is brilliant, and there's a win-win situation for the economy, for the fish, and for the environment. So it's fantastic. Tom, I interrupted you. So.
Well, no, I was going to say, when I was on the AFTA board, we worked with TU on the Good Samaritan. And in fact, I think I was probably in one of those meetings when you were at EPA.
You were.
This is exactly right. You described it. It's or Chris did, the antithesis of what we're talking about. And the reason why we have to have Good Samaritan is to be able to clean up mines, right? So if you can't be saying, gee, we think we should have a mine, and then say, well, we're not going to worry about cleaning it up. So, if somebody really wants to get in and dig hard and really support something that's a win-win for everybody, they should get behind this Good Samaritan law or legislation.
Good points. We're going to wrap things up here. Go ahead, McKie.
Brent, just one quick point. I totally agree with what they're saying about abandoned mines and stuff. I just wanted to note that Pebble itself and the Corps admit that the water treatment for Pebble would be necessary in perpetuity. And in perpetuity is a long, long time to be paid for by a company with minimal resources. And one of the pretty vigorous exchanges I had with Tom Collier, as I pointed out, I left the Department of Fish and Game as deputy commissioner. For about a decade, I did permitting work and did primarily project management of EISs. And we did the Greens Creek supplemental on expanding their tailings pile. Greens Creek has a more acidic ore, but it's just a tiny fraction of the size of Pebble. but we modeled with a high degree of certainty what was going to happen with that geochemistry in that pile for the next 500 years, and it was a lower degree of certainty for the next 50,000 years. When you look at the Pebble EIS, there's a page here and a couple things there and stuff, but there's nothing. I mean, we put out 100 and some plus page supplemental on the Greens Creek, which was much less of a problem, and there's just almost nothing here about that.
Really good point. Tom and Chris, any last words from you?
Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
for
you.
doing it. And you can go, if you want to get involved, you can go to standup.tu.org and you can sign a petition to the president. You can register your displeasure to the governor of Alaska. Someone said it earlier. This is one of these things that's really important for people to make their voices heard.
Yes.
Thank you, my friends. We appreciate your time and perspective on this important issue. So wishing
you all.
everybody a great day. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.